politician, I've watched numerous people attempting to initiate an honest intellectual discussion of women's issues. Women who are forcibly sterilized, the right to choose an abortion in the military, profiling of women at airports, breastfeeding, women on welfare, etc. Even introductions have discussed the rights of man and how a man must remain true to himself. Not only does this rhetoric serve as an exclusionary and violent discursive tool, but the very notion of sex, i.e. a biological distinction between man and woman, is gendered. There is no objective biological standard of man or woman from the beginning, as evidenced by the fact that doctors are sanctioned by the state to correct children with ambiguous genitalia. You should note that every day, 5 infants are perceived as abnormal and operated on in order to assign a binary gender. This is done without the patient's consent and is a violation of their privacy, according to Ricky Ann Wilkins, founder of the Transsexual Menace and Gender Pact, in Read My Lips from '97. About 1 in 2,000 births is intersex. 5 intersex infants are operated on each day. All these operations, of course, are performed without the patient's consent. Furthermore, this is an attempt to set a framework for evaluation of the rest of the round. Every time my colleagues speak of man or woman, male or female, he or she, they reaffirm a societal norm which increases direct societal violence against intersexual individuals. These patriarchal voices must be unpacked one by one, as Ricky Ann Wilkins further explains in '97. As de Beauvoir held, one is not born a woman, but becomes one. If femininity is an invention of men forced it on women, if feminine behavior is a learned cultural performance of hair, clothing, voice, gesture, and stance, so one is perceived as female, then by presenting yourself as a woman, it is you who have been co-opted into traditional sex roles, you who serve their institutions, and you who are performing here. As transgendered, we face 2 kinds of violence each day. One is the larger violence, that perpetuated by straight society on our bodies, that like Brandons and Marshalls are just additional bricks in the wall, a bloody and unspeakable wall, held together by transphobia, built 1 brick at a time in the silence and darkness of our invisibility, and this invisibility is facilitated by the smaller violence. If you turn over the little boxes into which you want to put us, they're all stamped, made in patriarchy. Little boxes are for things, not people. We are more complex than your hierarchy, than your theories. Additionally, an analysis of gender makes non-normalized males and females the other and reenacts oppression. Reinforcing male-female dichotomies benefit the heterosexual economy. Understanding the multiplicity of sex is necessary, as Wilkins further explains. As we look more deeply at the history of the category of women, we can ask what the political stakes in creating and enforcing false and simplistic dichotomies like male and female and masculine and feminine are. These binary structures benefit a presumptive and compulsive heterosexual economy. Heterosexism requires binary and opposing sexes and genders. Finally, I believe that silencing of genuine personhood within infants' sexes corrected is the most heinous violation of bodily right to privacy that can occur. As you listen to the following speeches that are presented, realize that silent acceptance of these social norms is complicity with a great atrocity. Open for cross-ex.
Ladies, taking that time first.
You have 30 seconds. That's fine.
Okay. What is your advocacy within the round? Do you feel that we need a policy that prevents doctors from assigning a specific gender role to kids at birth?
Well, my advocacy is that, drawing this biological distinction is bad in any realm, whether you're talking about, violence with men
but you
against
specifically
women.
talk about
But this
at
is
birth,
one,
right?
This is one manifestation of that, where infants are corrected because they're seen as different and not normal.
Understood. Now, it's obvious pretty much throughout your affirmative case that there's a societal stereotype and a negative stereotype about intersexual people, correct?
Right.
Okay. Now, your contention about privacy, do you indicate that these people, the people who undergo some sort of surgery at birth, are victims of a trauma, or what is the violation of privacy and how does it traumatize them, like you claim?
Well, my argument is that, first of all, the Fourth Amendment protects bodily integrity above all else it should, and these people's bodies are being altered without their consent, obviously, since they're just,
Okay,
right after their birth.
well, they
and
can't give consent, so at what point, like,
Right.
would there be a justifiable
Also,
policy? Like,
well,
at
the
what point?
second Wilton's evidence I read talks about the trauma that intersex individuals face by normalized society and how they're discriminated against and seen as different throughout their lives because of this view of
That's
how
what
they're
traumatizes them,
traumatized.
correct?
Right.
Okay, all right, understood. So what sort of alternative would you propose? Like, what would be a better idea than the status quo?
Well, first of all, not framing everything in a position of man versus women as a biological difference.
What would be the proper
Also,
term of reference for that? How should we acknowledge it? How do we ever solve for any sort of rights when we can't acknowledge a group of people who need those rights?
well, it depends what situation you're referring
If I say women need
Well-
rights, you would criticize me because that's enforcing a gender category. How would I ever
Right,
extend those rights to
that
them
excludes
without...
and marginalizes, transsexual or transgendered individuals who aren't that category.
Thank you. Is everybody set? First and foremost, I'd like to congratulate everybody who's made this round. I'm honored to be here, and it's been a great ride. Now, Jerry Seinfeld once said, "Did you ever try to pick out one of those cold medicines? You stand there going, well, this one is quick acting, and this one is long lasting. What is more important, the present or the future?" When it comes to something, what Corey proposes may immediately enhance intersexual privacy rights, but it is not a prudent policy for what truly matters, and that is the long term. The negative position is that the status quo can solve for the case harms on face, and that a more prudent policy than Corey's is necessary to break down the stigma of being intersexual. Now, off of the top argument where she indicates that everything is gendered, the first response to that is that proves that society already has a negative stereotype of intersexual people. She never substantiates any evidence that can break that down. Now, off her first piece of evidence, she says 5 infants are infringed upon every day without consent. The first argument to that is they cannot give their consent. That's not a plausible option. The second argument is they're not conscious of the privacy violation. She never outlines why it would be a bad thing. The third argument is, remember, parents would give the consent. That's implied consent of parental rights. Now, off of her second argument, that the round is framed in a he-she and it creates violence against intersexuals. The first argument is that the case links sex and gender at the top of the debate. This entrenches the harms that she's criticizing. The second argument is that the status quo is already attempting to solve the problem. Pediatricians have issued guidelines concerning intersexual babies. The San Francisco Chronicle in 2000 of July, confronting some of the most highly charged issues in child development, the nation's leading group of pediatricians issued its first ever guidelines yesterday for treatment of newborns with ambiguous genitalia. A report by the American Academy of Pediatrics called the birth of such a child a social emergency that demands circumspect approach.